the live button?
No,
Yeah, we're
no,
live.
here we go now.
Okay, now here we go. Now we're live. Boy, I was sitting there just talking to nobody. Nobody. But hey, we're good. I'm going to go ahead and mute my mic. It's your show there, Liberty Cowgirl. Go for it.
Welcome, everybody, to the Liberty Cowgirl Network. We got a very special show tonight. We want everyone to just bear with us. We are having internet feedback issues, but we're doing our best to commandeer those behind the scenes. But more importantly, we're extremely happy to have the retired Lieutenant Colonel Darin Gaub with us in the house tonight. And he's going to bring us some great information tonight. Welcome to the show, Lieutenant Colonel.
Well, hey, it is a great evening, and I'm glad to join both of you and anybody who's joining you online. Always happy to be able to talk with fellow patriots who are fearless and sharing the truth. And we'll talk to anybody, no matter what, all the time. And so again, it is my pleasure and an honor to join you. And thank you so much for inviting me to join you again.
Well, thank you for being here. We're just happy to get you back. We know that there's a lot going on. We know there's a lot of ground to cover tonight, and we're going to get right up into it. We went away and forewent with all the musical productions in order to not have any issues tonight, and we feel it's more important to get right into the information. And we want to welcome everybody who's viewing over here on the Liberty Cowgirl Network. We are live at Liberty Cowgirl Nation on Rumble tonight also, so we want to welcome all of those viewers, and of course all the people across the channels from Liberty Warrior Nation. Welcome tonight, everybody. LW, I want to thank you for joining me as my special co-host tonight. When we were going to do this show, you said, listen, I'd love to be part of it. And as we all know, it's season 2 for the Liberty Cowgirl Network. So it's an extra special broadcast for us. We could not imagine that in 1 year time we would be here where we are tonight, but we're in the fight. We're in the fight in a very big way, and we're looking forward to bringing updates to the general public on a more regular basis this season. So thank you for joining me tonight, LW.
It's my absolute pleasure. And hey, season 2, that's a big step. You know, we just started season 3 here at LWN last month. We're going on our 3rd season. We just finished our 2nd year anniversary. And hey, we got a lot of wonderful people that are going to be watching and listening tonight. Just some of them that I see tonight: Kathy H., Deborah Shimko, are in the chat. I know my aunt's trying to find us. Hey, we're on LWN Reloaded tonight as well, live. Happy birthday to Carlene. I just seen her jump into chat. Happy birthday tonight. We're streaming on Rumble as well, Liberty Warrior Nation Rumble page. So for those of you who enjoy watching us on Rumble, hey, we're kicking off season 2 with Liberty Cowgirl Nation tonight. I see Power Girl there in the chat as well. So good evening to Power Girl. Good to see her too. Hey, here's something that I found very interesting when we're doing the testing this afternoon. Rumble, if you go to Rumble on your computer, on your laptop, it looks like Rumble has upgraded their system. And if you like to chat, I'm going to be on Rumble tonight on my Rumble page. I will chat with you guys as well. It's got an open chat just like YouTube. So try it out tonight. Hop over there, join the conversation. Like I said, I'm gonna let the Colonel and Liberty Cowgirl kind of direct how the show's gonna go tonight. But if we go into this Q&A, I will be on my Rumble page, and I'll try to grab a question or two out of Rumble for you there to ask the Colonel. So I'm going to be in and out of Rumble. And the other great thing about Rumble is it looks like maybe there's some super chatting that you can do over there on Rumble. And I kicked YouTube to the curb when it come to super chat. And so I'm curious to see how the Rumble super chat works, because I actually sent myself a message earlier today on that, and that was kind of cool to see that pop in there. So it doesn't look like it works on your phones. You have to go to a laptop. So if you guys are on a laptop or a computer and would like to follow us over there on Rumble tonight, I will be in my Rumble channel tonight hanging out. So thanks for that, Liberty Cowgirl. It's a pleasure being here, and always a great honor to share the stage with Colonel there. I love it.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of the Colonel, listen, first of all, thank you so very much for coming back to our show. We've all been looking forward to an update. I know you and your organization, Restore Liberty, you're out there. You're out there on a move. You guys are at picking up a fast pace now. I'm seeing it all over social media. So I think the first place to start now is I would love to get an update on where you're at as an organization, particularly if you could give us an update on, I see out there, Restore Liberty Florida, Restore Liberty Mississippi, Restore Liberty Colorado, Restore Liberty Montana. Man, you guys are on fire. You're up in those state houses, and just to be frank, you guys are kicking some butt up there. You guys are connected to the right people, and you're up there and you're making change. So if you could, sir, just give us an update on all of those three areas, and of course recap how people themselves can get involved and how they can find their state directors.
Hey, thanks, Liberty Cowgirl. What an awesome introduction. Again, I'm honored to be here. It is a thrill to join good patriots across the country, wherever they may be. And it's if you ever read the book that's called How to Win Friends and Influence People, sometimes we're making friends and sometimes we're not, and that's okay too. But Restore Liberty, like you said, is really gaining some steam, and it's really fun to see because it's been an investment of mine and my co-founder Blaine Holt for the last couple of years now, and we know that it has to take its time because you've got to find the right people, and God's going to walk you to those people at the time that He sees fit. That is right for the organization and for what we're doing. And I'm just thrilled to say that we're over 30 state directors across the country right now, from Hawaii up to Pennsylvania, down to Florida and Washington State. And here in Montana, of course, where we did get some snow there, Mike, but it's melting quickly, 5 inches of good stuff. And it's a great time. But the executive team continues to focus on what we're doing. Every once in a while, we get a blessing. General Holt and I were able to team up today on a Newsmax interview for about 8 minutes. And when we get to do side-by-side work, I'm not sure the commentators even needed. We'll just go back and forth. You put two pilots in the same room, it's kind of dangerous. But we're thrilled. We're fighting hard. As Montana has a supermajority GOP in both houses, but as you can imagine, there's lots of shades of purple in there, and a lot of people that show their a lack of courage and understanding of what's really going on. And you try to grab them, educate them, and push them. And if they won't be pushed, then at least you got to expose them and tell people the truth about them. That's just the way it has to work. As you know, there, Cynthia in Colorado, she's just a phenomenal patriot working up at the Capitol, and with a completely different legislature than in Montana. But, she is leading a prayer warrior team, and other people are leading prayer warrior teams around the Capitol building and with a lot of the legislation that's working there. But we in Restore Liberty, although we fight in the Capitol buildings, we work with legislation on multiple different topics. We do not believe that the true road to liberty is going to go through a state capitol anywhere in this country right now. It goes through the people doing those things that are best for them and their families, that in many ways just unplug themselves from the government in as many ways as you possibly can. And we're not anti-government people. We are people who say that government should function as it is designed to do in accordance with the American Republic system. Limited, enumerated, and very specific and limited powers. And we don't want to get rid of the Constitution or Declaration of Independence. We want to reread it, reinforce it, go back to it, and continue from there. We, the people, have given up our voice for far too long. And if we just use that voice, I often compare this to a choir. When I sing horrible. Nobody wants to listen. But if you surround me with 150 people, we can all sound great together. And we have to do that. But that 150 needs to be 150 million at least or more. And it's happening. And I love the fact that it is happening across the country because I have the perspective and view of being able to see it through the people that I work with, and what a pleasure they are to work with, just like you. And so that's Restore Liberty. We're making a lot of progress, and I am thrilled to be part of the solution. Even if we're not the entire solution, we're part of it, and that's okay. And all of us coming together, that's the entire solution. And it's very, very exciting.
Well, you're
I
right.
got a
You're
question.
right about that, sir.
And
Thank you so much for what you and your organization are doing. So many people are at a loss right now on how to get involved, and you all and your team are reaching across the country. You've been at this for a couple of years now. You're very well established, and I'm touting your name all over the internet for people to get in touch with your website, to get in touch with their state directors. We have a lot of different patriot organizations out there right now actually focusing on the actions that it takes to affect change in this country. They're not just sitting back and talking and complaining about not what's going right, but they're out there, boots on the ground, and they're demonstrating to other cities how it's done. And again, that's why I embrace you and your organization, and what you and General Holt has created, to me, in my mind, are solutions for people. So I highly respect you gentlemen for coming to the table by not only presenting the problems, calling it out for what it is, but also providing people the tools necessary to actually go out there and affect change in their neighborhood. And of course, I'm looking forward to, now that we're back on the air, of course, we all know I'm from Colorado, so we'll be highlighting our state director and Cynthia and keeping everybody up to speed on what's going on here. But even more importantly, I really challenge everybody to go to, if you're down in Florida, Restore Liberty Florida is on fire right now. They are up there. They're fighting big battles. Restore Liberty Mississippi, again, all those other 20 states that you talked about. There's so many people at this point for us to keep track of. It's hard to keep track of everybody, but what we're trying to do is actually highlight those individuals, bring them to the table, let them tell everyone how they can get involved in their states, and try and do this on a national level in order to disseminate this information out to the public. But I want to just play a short clip here, Colonel, of a recent appearance that you did in some testimony that you gave up in the Montana House. So let's play a quick clip of that, and then we'll come back and talk about it. And I think we've lost the Colonel for a moment. We'll get him back.
You still trying to play the video?
Testimony here, but all of this is in support of this bill. And I've received notes from around the country, and I've published this as an article to about 5 different national outlets and a bunch across Montana as well. My background is as a 7 veteran from tactical to national strategic level, covering 28 years of service. I started out my Army career conducting those funerals in Arlington Cemetery to the total of about 600 or more. Came back to Montana after retirement and did more funerals as a coordinator for those across. I've buried my family, my friends, and far too many soldiers that I know. I've commanded up to the Army Brigade level, 3,500 soldiers, 115 aircraft, and worked at the national strategic level for many years. My job was running a large aviation task force across 6 countries in Eastern Europe. Also spent and now work numerous grassroots efforts, including constitutional education. You've already heard about what this bill is and what it does, why it is needed. We've expended blood and treasure in expeditionary conflicts from the Korean War to Syria today, which is still ongoing. This is how Rome operated. The foundation of this bill is simple. The U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 is very clear. There is no argument against it. That power has never been delegated. The Supremacy Clause. In the laws that must be constitutional. If they're not constitutional, they're not supreme. They can be discarded. The 10th Amendment, which was written after the Supremacy Clause to give this the predominant powers. You've already heard about the Guard and the militia. The authorized use of military force is not even really a legal event. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 is the same, and I can promise you the 92-day Powers Resolution, I can move entire forces from the Army overseas, and they'll be in the thick of a fight that you can't action before they leave. Quickly running through some arguments you may hear that are not valid. Threats to close military bases. That's a bullying tactic. It won't happen, and Malmstrom will not close. It's got a national strategic mission, and it's not up to the executive and DoD to close bases. This is far more complicated of a process. I've been through it twice. National security. The real risk is in continuing to ignore the clear requirements of the Constitution. Congress can meet quickly if needed. This is only for overseas combat, not for normal National Guard duties stateside and Homeland Security. The courts have ruled as well, only overseas peaceful training missions can they deploy without a declaration of war. Funding and equipment restrictions, bullying tactics, and distractions. That's all they are. This is about Congress and the constitutional requirement to declare war, nothing else. There's been an argument that this does not conform to the Constitution. In fact, that is the entire point. We have not conformed to the Constitution for years. It's time that we start doing that. And it's at the states level and the governors who have to enforce it. The highest principle here is, and the most important this entire debate is that of adhering to the Constitution and its clearly defined dictates. Congress alone declares war. The president executes the war. That's it. Nothing has superseded that in American history, except for some of our own apathy, and I'm guilty too. The last thing I'll say is the oath of office. To all currently in uniform and those who've worn our military uniform in the past, all others who've recited an oath of office containing these or similar words. I do solemnly swear I will support and defend the Constitution. I will bear true faith and allegiance. We are sworn to support and defend the Constitution. Not a president, not a Congress, not a defense industry, not a budget or a funding source or anything else. We are not to be bribed and coerced, and to support this bill is to fulfill our oaths. And all in this room who wear or have worn the uniform must support it, as that is what our oath requires. We are duty bound to do what is right, not what is convenient. It's called leadership. All who would fight this bill would cast aside their oaths, and their words then mean nothing to me. Thank you, and I'll be willing to stand for questions. I'll stand outside though and be available. If I ask for a due pass, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gaub.
All right, I think Liberty Cowgirl. There we go. All right. What a great what a great piece there, Colonel, that you shared there. Really enjoyed some of the things that you touched on there. One that I really took away from that was the fact that you guys swear allegiance, swear an oath to the Constitution. You don't swear it to a president. You don't swear it to a political party. You don't swear it to an entity or a machine or anything like that. It's to the Constitution of the United States, and it shall be upheld. It shall, you shall protect it from anything foreign or domestic. And I think a lot of people forget about that. It's not just about these entities outside of our borders that are trying to cause havoc, chaos, or destruction, but it's also what's inside our borders is just as important as what's outside. And sometimes it's even more important when we see some of the things that happen in this country today, and certain regimes and certain White Houses that are out there constantly trying to destroy America. They're destroying our southern border. They're gutting our military. They've killed our energy independence. Those are things that I think that all Americans, whether you're red or blue, should be standing up and fighting against. So I appreciate your service, and I've said this many a times, not just in your past service, but your service today that you're doing today. You, General Holt, and the entire Restore Liberty movement that you guys have started. Thank you guys so much for your service.
Hey, Mike. Yeah, it's an honor, regardless of where this goes, to at least be part of this fight. And I will tell you that both Blaine Holt and myself had completely different plans when we retired. He was going to do businesses, build businesses, and do that kind of thing. I was going to get a relatively simple job here in Montana, never leave the state, enjoy being retired, and enjoy being at home again. But if you're a veteran who takes their oath seriously, then you cannot sit back and watch what is happening and not get involved in some way. That doesn't mean that everybody has to start a national organization and build that thing over a few years of time and keep going with it and try to get on these major media outlets media outlets of every single size to share the message. It does mean making a conscious decision to get involved. And if your level of involvement is limited to a school board testimony, then do that. Because I wouldn't call that really truly limited in the first place. That's where this country is built. It's not DC is at the top, this pinnacle of power, and the individuals at the bottom. That's upside down. The individual and the family are the most powerful entities in this entire country and the most important entities in this country. Restore Liberty also says it's time to flex the 10th Amendment muscle and just dare the federal government to say, you know what? Go ahead. You make a move. We're a state. We're a sovereign state, and we don't have to do what you say. We gave you the powers, federal government, in the first place. We didn't, those who delegate the powers to somebody or something can remove them. That's the states and the people. The federal government is supposed to be such a distant, far off thing that's totally irrelevant to most of our lives. And it's obviously not that anymore. So as a veteran who's taken that oath, well, probably 5 or 6 times over the years, I take it very, very seriously that we are to support and uphold and defend the Constitution, nothing else. Because in so doing, what we're really taking an oath to is the people of this country, and to defend and guard their liberty to make their decisions for themselves and their own families, regardless of whether we agree with them or not. Because neither side should use the power of government to enforce their vision on the other. And we can take that in different directions when it comes to the argument, because when you start talking children, that's a little bit of a different argument that I would make for sure. But ultimately, the solutions are not in the government. And I'm also, as an ordained person, calling on the church and the pastors, the ministers of various types. Christ's church, by the way, not just anybody, because anybody can call themselves a church. That's not going to make a difference. What's going to make a difference is Christ's church. So pastors, your church is not a four-sided building. Your church is everybody that follows Christ on the entire planet. And we all have to be the ones leading, not following the primary influence in this nation. Let's make this nation what it's supposed to be, that beacon to others, so people can wonder what the difference is. Then we can tell them what the difference is. and walk them to where they need to be. And that's part of Restore Liberty as well. Now, every single one of us, when the new state director joins up, they get a founder's Bible. Because Christ, the cross, and the Constitution, what else can you imagine is going to fix this country? It's us.
Well, thank you for that, Colonel. And you speak exactly the words of that so many want to hear. But I do want to ask you a question in that regard, because of course we've got a lot of different freedom groups out there doing a lot of different things, and as long as you're working for the people, it's all good in my eyes. But there is a bit of confusion out there, and I'm even confused a little bit in my own mind. Can you explain to us the difference between what Restore Liberty does and what the people that are going out to try and reclaim their state de jures, so to speak? I know there's a lot of confusion, or are in fact y'all doing the same thing and it's just being done in different ways?
I want to add to that question too, Colonel, real quick, because I think Liberty Cowgirl's hitting on a very important point. Now, there are states out there that are standing up these assemblies. And are you an assembly? Are you part of an assembly? And what they're doing is they're going out and they're creating citizen grand juries. And they're holding people accountable. How important is a citizen grand jury? Are you guys part of that as Restored Liberty? Is that something that you also try to help do? Because we've been told in the last 2 years that we got away from the grand juries. And that's part of the reason why, in my opinion, the judicial system is a little more corrupt than what we'd like to see it, is because we've got judges and we've got prosecutors doing all this work now, and the citizen is taken out of the equation. And we, the people, are the ones that have that power. So grand juries, to me, are very important. I just wanted to add to that question.
No, thanks. That's great. I will tell you that it is not a core mission of Restore Liberty. But we don't stand against it. It's just not what we are doing. So, for example, one of the things that Restore Liberty is a little bit different with is we believe in the idea of coalitions. And so in Montana, I work with the Montana Citizens Council on judicial accountability, and we advocate for citizen grand jury legislation. But I do that with them, not as a core tenet of Restore Liberty itself. Because if someone's already doing it, that's doing it effectively, we'll help advertise it, we'll help talk about it and educate it on it, but the efforts behind it and the organization and how things, those kinds of things, how they're working, are already in other organizations. So we're just going to pull alongside them and assist in any way. And with what I'm doing in Montana specifically, I kind of like to call it prisoner exchange. We're going to grab somebody from their organization and we're going to say, hey, why don't you join us on a board or an effort with Restore Liberty? This is what we're doing. We love what you're doing, so I'm going to join your board and help with what you're doing. And so when you need something with what you're doing, call me. I'll help. And if I need something from them, the same is true. So that we think the idea of the assemblies, the grand juries, all of these things should be explored and should be pushed for, because they can help this country. So we're never going to stand in the way of something like that. We're going to help those things under what we're doing as an organization that's a little bit different. So now if you start talking about things like 10th Amendment sanctuaries with actual teeth and consequence for violating them, of holding people and holding them accountable for their oath, education, things like that, we're there a lot. But we're also there a lot when you start talking about things like Freedom Farm Academies. Grow your own, eat your own, build your small communities back. Food, water, shelter, those things should be independent at the small community level, to where even if the government said, okay, we're leaving here, everybody will actually applaud, first of all, and then say, we're self-sufficient of our, within our own means here anyways. If you distribute the supply chains and the risk and all these different things across all these small communities across the country, and every one of them says, you know what, we really don't need you in the first place, other than for very basic needs of governance, that's what we're designed to be in the first place. We're not designed to have some uber boss in Washington, D.C. And the last thing I'll say, and I'll hand it back to you, whoever wants it, but one of the things that bothers me is when the Supreme Court decides on a case. I'll use that word for now. Whether it's the state or federal or whatever it may be, they call it a ruling. Now, I'm sorry, the courts don't rule anybody. That's not how it works. They can make an opinion, but they don't have a standing army. And so I dare say most of the time, things like, I don't know, when the Supreme Court eventually will probably see cases about these men competing in women's sports. Everybody's like, we got to get behind Congress and push this legislation. Yes, do that. But on the other hand, if you're a state governor or an organization, just say, okay, that's moderately interesting, Supreme Court or state Supreme Court. We really don't care. We're going to do what's right. So send the Supreme Court's army after me, and I'll be fine. So kicking on back to you.
Well, thank you for that, Colonel. Thank you for the Colonel. Got a slight delay on my end. But thank you for clearing that up for us. And, because I think a lot of people are really starting to engage now on their local level. The word is getting out. People realize that they have to get involved, and they're running across all these separate efforts and groups. And I wanted to just clarify that because we're crossing over into a lot of those areas too, as we run across these different freedom type of groups. And I think it's important that people understand, just up there with signs protesting. They're actually up there filing documents, making testimony, as we just watched you make up there. So I encourage people to continue to get involved in that respect. We're going to keep highlighting the people and the organizations and the state directors in each and individual state and what's happening, because we can see that different stuff is taking place, and depending upon what state you live on. I'm here in Colorado. We're fighting certain things that are applicable to our state, where other states are fighting things that are applicable to their state. So it's a lot to keep up with. We're going to try and focus on that more and really bring that to the forefront and give progress to the American people about what's going on. Now, I want to ask you another very popular question out there in the public forum right now, Colonel. We have a lot of people that are hanging on the daily to this EBS notification. The military's going to activate. The National Guard is coming in. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on all of that theory that's out there in that respect, because I think that's what keeps a lot of people stagnant, is waiting for something like that. What are your thoughts on that, Colonel?
Oh, let's see. We got an hour and a half left. I think we can use it, or whatever we've got. That's a great question, and you've obviously teed up some very good ones, and I'm happy to answer them. On this one, I wrote a piece on my Substack that talks about trust the plan, and it goes through the entire process of our mindset within Restore Liberty, which is there is no plan. There is no plan that the military is going to activate and go arrest people out of the White House, and there's some southern White House in Florida, and then there's just massive sun rising and filling the darkness, and everything's going to be okay. No, that doesn't exist. There is only one plan, and that plan is whatever plan you make as an individual with the people that are around you to take action and do something that makes a difference. And I guess that's one of the things that makes Restore Liberty quite a bit different. And when you talk about things are different in different states, we are not trying to create a plan that is a plan of action, a blanket for every single state that's part of the Restore Liberty. What's happening in Mississippi is different than in Colorado, Washington, Hawaii, and New York. So if our state directors can come on board and say, hey, we believe in the general vision and the goals of what Restore Liberty is trying to do. Here's how we can do this best within, you pick the state. That's how we operate. That's how Blaine Holt and I are very familiar with operating because of our time in the military. We're never top-down national approach type of a thing. So there's that plan of the military coming to save everything, coming to arrest people, coming to be this knight in shining armor. Just trash that. It doesn't exist. We work within the highest levels of the military complex, from the Pentagon down to the National Guard, down to individual soldiers across so many states. We know these people by name. We've worked with a lot of them by name, whether we like them or not, doesn't matter at this point. But do not sit on your couch expecting that anybody in uniform is just going to come save the day. Not going to happen. So you better find out very quickly how and where you're going to get involved so you can actually truly make a difference. Because if you're waiting on that, you will be waiting until the day you die, because it's not happening.
I think that's a great answer. I think that was a great question, Liberty Cowgirl, because I know that there's still a lot of confusion out there and still a lot of people waiting. And, I saw where some of that could maybe be true in the very beginning. And I was waiting too. I was waiting for things to happen, and it seemed like nothing ever happened. And so that's why I lean toward the middle of reality, because I think without reality, we can't move forward. Here's a question that I pulled out of that video that Liberty Cowgirl just played, because you make a point about this and you talk about it a lot, and that is militias. Can you go into a little bit of detail there, Colonel, about how important a militia is? It seems like I hear that Montana is like an epicenter for certain militias up there to do training and things. And in the Constitution, it says that we should have a ready and well exercised militia in the Constitution for good reason. And is that part of why you talk about militias so much? Because the word militia has gotten a really horrible name, just like tagged to it, just like patriot and all these other pseudonyms that we've all grabbed at times. I mean, Liberty Warrior, Liberty's got a bad name, Warrior's got militia. When you talk about militias with people who maybe just watch CNN and they don't really pay attention to politics or what's really going on, and they don't know the Constitution. When you say the word militia, boy, they're like, oh my goodness, there's a bunch of crazies with guns. That's not the case. That is absolutely the exact opposite of what militias are and what they're intended to be. So could you go into a little bit of that and tell us how important they are, please?
Sure, absolutely. No, and the reason why that was brought out in that particular testimony was that testimony was about a bill called Defend the Guard, which is all about that the Congress has the responsibility to declare war before the president can execute the war as the executive and commander-in-chief. It is really that simple. But as is typical, the establishment who works against the people here, we're also working against that bill. And so they like to paint all of this as the desire to establish the kind of militias that people envision, as you described. Crazy people running around the woods, swastikas everywhere, whatever that may, whatever comes to mind. But in essence, the militia is the National Guard. Over the course of history and time and everything that has happened since that day, that is what the National Guard is. And the governors are the commander-in-chief of their National Guard within their state. And they're paid for largely by their state, to make it simple. That's why that testimony says what it says. Militias are extraordinarily important because it's the citizens defending themselves. And though we probably never thought we'd be there, and we still hope we never actually get there, this is potentially the citizens defending themselves against their own government that is overreaching and doing the things that their own government is not allowed to do in the first place in this republic. So now you have to separate out National Guard from militias as are commonly understood in today, which is the banding together of different people forming these chains of command, forming these units and organizations, training together, and doing those kinds of things across the country at the state level, local level, whatever they may be. In Montana, we have 5 major militias across this state, all voluntary, of course. None of them are paid for anything that they're doing. They're just there to be a part of defending this state and this country if called upon. This is very much your scenario of Red Dawn. They're going to come out of the woodwork. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I would also give that word of caution to people to make sure that they know what they're getting involved in, because there are militias and organizations and various things out there that are extraordinarily dangerous in both of their ideology and what they're trying to do. So, know the difference between a constitutional supporting militia style organization and those that are completely off the reservation, I guess you could say, and more dangerous to themselves than anything else. But I would never try to crush militias in any way. They have a role. If they do it right, they're a huge advantage to this country because of how this country was formed in the first place. I hope that answers the question well enough.
I think you answered it just perfectly for me personally, Colonel. A militia being the National Guard makes sense to me. Plus, there's other militias out there too that are not part of the National Guard. I think they're just as important. Here's a question from chat, and I have to ask the Colonel this because Harvest Mary Moon's been asking this question not just tonight, but several times during some of our lives, and I haven't had an opportunity to really give it attention and answer the question because back to your comment about there is no plan. If you're waiting for the military to come in and save us all, you're going to be waiting a heck of a long time. This kind of coincides with that a little bit. The question is, okay, I got a question. If there ever was a day that comes that this regime ever told the military to round us up or our guns, will that ever happen? She's asked many questions similar to this. If the military did anything, who's going to stand up for us, stuff like that. Could you maybe address that a little bit there, Colonel?
Sure. I wish I had the ability to read enough people's minds to know what they would do in any given circumstance. What I can say, I think we can all probably safely say, is if this administration or regime had the desire to do that, they would certainly try it. They're not beyond that by any stretch of the imagination. We've seen them try it in many other ways with illegal FBI raids on people trying to protest for pro-life efforts in various things across the country. The Department of Justice is weaponized against the people. They're no longer the Department of Justice. There are many others like that. The Department of Defense is much bigger, which means they're much more capable. But I can promise you, being in communication with a lot of people throughout the military, that there are a lot of people who would join us on a podcast like this, and you would absolutely love them to death. And they're in the military waiting for a day when they have a commander-in-chief that's even remotely worthy of respect. They have an administration and those that are around them are remotely worthy of respect. And those people will not do this. Will there be some? I'm not naive. Will there be some, if that call were ever made, who would absolutely take part in something like that? I don't doubt it. But we're not there yet. I can pretty much guarantee you we're not there yet. Will we ever get there? That depends upon us as a people en masse raising our voices together in the millions, not in the tens. So if that's a concern, get involved, whether it's with us or with somebody else. It doesn't matter. Do something that's effective and keep your voice out there no matter how large or small. I will promise you, as a veteran and a guy who's been around almost everything in the military, one of the benefits and the beauties of the National Guard is they live among you. They are in your communities, and many of them, you know them. And if the National Guard around here actually rolled up in front of my house, I would probably know them anyways. But I know how to start a Humvee in about 3 seconds and drive it off. So there's 18 million veterans across this country, and so many of them would have nothing to do with working against the American people.
Well, thank you for answering that question. I think it's an important question, and I think you answered it perfectly. So my takeaway from that answer, folks, was No, it's not going to happen. Is there possibly sections of the military that would take that call if Potato Head put that out there? It's possible. But if you, we're not there yet. I don't think we will ever get there because honestly, there's too many citizens out here that are ex-military, retired military, and some of us good old boys, country boys who grew up hunting and fishing. There's just too many of us to really go that direction. It's kind of like I look at our current government trying to pull something like that on us would be like any other country trying to invade America. It'd be the wrong move because there's too many of us. I think one of the reports I did months ago was there's something like I know there's around 330 million Americans, or there's around 330 million people in the United States. And I believe the number was something like 400 million firearms, registered firearms. That's not including the non-registered. I think there's 400 million registered firearms in America. That's one weapon for every person that's on this side of the fence. That's huge. That's a lot. Why do you think that the Canadians and the Australians tell Americans don't ever give up your Second Amendment? Don't ever give up your Second Amendment. Because personally, I think the Second Amendment is what's keeping us from being a full-blown communist country at this point. It's the barrier that we have between us and that. So the Second Amendment is very, very important to me, and I think it should be very important to everybody else.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, it's the Second Amendment secures all the rest, and there's no way around that. And so we have to keep that one on the forefront. And I would say that the Second Amendment primarily guards the first: your right to worship, your right to speech, and everything else falls out of that. Because if you lose those two, you lose all the rest of them, anyways, and it's largely irrelevant. But I would also say that that Constitution, all those amendments, and everything that we have in our contract with the government are worthless if we do not enforce them. Nobody's going to do it for us. There is no shining armor type of thing, or knight in shining armor type of thing. And so God called me very clearly to do what I'm doing. There was no doubt about it. I wouldn't be here at all, no matter what. And so we're doing it to the best of our ability. It's kind of like God equips people to do the things that he wants them to do, even if they're not prepared for it in the first place. I think my military career was only a warm-up to do this now. I had no idea about any of that. None of us can see that far ahead in our own lives. We can't see, in a minute from now, we might not even be alive. So that's all we can do is our sacred duty and let God do his part. Whatever he's going to do, it doesn't matter. And if everything in the book of Revelation plays out in the next week or so, okay. Well, I know where I'm going, so I don't worry about any of that stuff. I'm just going to keep walking, keep going where I'm supposed to go, keep sending a message out, and whether it be a message of political engagement or whether it be the message that is a church-based, or whether I'm preaching in front of a church, or whether I'm writing things that talk about, the Romans road to salvation out of the Bible, those kinds of things. If that's what I'm going to do and that's what I'm called to do, I'm just going to keep doing it. And if God decides to, basically go with the greatest reset in human history tomorrow, okay, I'm not worried about it. I don't think anybody should be worried about it unless they don't know Christ. If they don't know Christ, then I think we need to have another conversation.
Well, amen on that one, Colonel. Amen on that one, Colonel. I agree with that wholeheartedly, and I'm glad to hear you say that tonight. I think a lot of people need to look inwardly at themselves in that respect. And, along those lines, in moving on down the line, we talk about the military. There's been a lot to say about our readiness. And again, there's been a lot of retired military people out there for over a year, particularly when they started enforcing this, and then denying people's request not to do it for religious exemptions. Nonetheless, it's been a ton of court battles. The statistics are now starting to surface on the actual damage that's been done. You, first and foremost, out of anyone, are probably aware, not probably, are aware via the pipeline of the effects that this has had on pilots. Can you speak to that? Because we know we had these, and again, our apologies to the family, but I want to bring this back to the surface. These Black Hawk crashes that recently just happened here. I know they're mistakes, but a lot of people are gearing this back to the damage that this had on all of the pilots and how that has severely damaged the readiness of this country. What are your thoughts in that regard, sir?
Yeah, that's a tough one. But in the end, it's really just easy because there's a truth. And the truth is that is one way that was used or weaponized against our own military forces. I've got people who've worked for me in the past who have been under duress from their own chain of command for 2 years because they refused to do that particular action. And it's shameful. Shame on the chain of command, shame on everybody involved for being a part of this, because it was pretty clear to a lot of us from the beginning that this was not a medical cure. It was a medical weapon against the people, both what came out of China and what our response was in many ways. And it is damaging our readiness in so many ways. So when I wrote an article called "The Army of the Woke," that was part of it. If you take that and you add in the woke agenda of all the different racial components and driving people into tribes and doing all this kind of stuff, what you're doing is weakening the military from the inside in ways that a conflict never would do. You're taking the patriots and trying to push them out of the military and put somebody else in. And that's when I get concerned about what the military would be used for and what they would be capable of doing. That is driving our personnel readiness into the floor. Morale, everything. It is just terrible right now. And a person in uniform who's honest will tell you that that is the case. Guard, active, it doesn't matter. The other piece of this is selling our readiness, material readiness overseas. We keep sending stuff to Ukraine. Why? Yeah, you can argue all day long about the necessity of that conflict and whose side we should be on and the history of and all of it. But one of the results is you're draining the West, and the U.S. included in all of that, of the supplies and material that we would need to win a war. That also is shameful. I don't think we should be doing that. And if we are doing it, then we need to be standing up an industrial base similar to World War II to make sure that we're not losing our own capacity here. We're going to foreign nations to find ammunition and other things. We should never have to do that. What America is capable of is amazing. But it takes a non-corrupt government and many other things to make that kind of a reality possible, to where we can turn things out the way we need to do. I really love the Reagan doctrine. With a strong enough defense, we can do anything else we want. Just leave us alone. And we're at the point now where we've got to stop playing global military police and come back home and rake our own yard and quit complaining about our neighbors. We've got way too much work to do here. If I had my way and I could snap my fingers and make one move immediately that would make that very clear, I would bring the entire 2nd Infantry Division back from South Korea, and I would put them on the Texas, New Mexico, Arizona border with Mexico and guard our own borders, not the border with North Korea.
Well, thank you for that, Colonel. I know I just wanted to bring up some of these issues. They've been building. I'm monitoring people's chats and the response of the American public. They have more questions than answers at this point. So I'm trying to find some of these answers for a lot of people out there. Now, I want to talk about 3 more important, quickly, topics before we turn it over to the chat and let the people engage with you personally and let them ask you questions that might be in their mind. There's a lot to say about the document leaks lately. There's a lot to say about the repeal of the Iraq military authorizations that are going on out there. And then one red light that's gleaming all over the internet is the Restrict Act and the impact of that on the American people. So I want to just hit on those three very important topics right now before we get to, in the end, we'll summarize. I know everybody's waiting to hear your analysis on what's going on with Ukraine, Syria. How does that play into what's happening with Sudan and things on the world stage? But I think these domestic things are important to get to first, because so many times when we hear from you all, it's only in short increments, and we're not afforded the luxury as we have tonight to really sit you down for an hour and really just get your analysis on a lot of these other topics that are out there for an extended period. So let me quick play a clip here, and then we'll talk about it, and we'll see where we go from there. Hold on one moment. Let me get this out.
Okay, since that's taken some time to load, would you like me to start? And when it pops up, I can just stop. It doesn't look like it wants to cooperate. You want me to go ahead and get started on the answer, and then if it pops up, I will just shut up immediately and keep going from let the video keep going.
Colonel, I'd go ahead and give your answer. We got a lot of dead air time right now. I'd go ahead and give your answer, and if it starts playing, we can just be quiet.
Perfect. Yep, I can do that easy enough. Well, let's start off with these classified documents. And it's not just my opinion. I've found that there are many people with the same opinion who've worked in the same circles. That this document leak, the source is not an airman in Massachusetts. The source is someone high up in the Directorate of National Intelligence or the Department of Defense with the highest clearances and the right access to get to that information. I've had a top secret SCI or Compartmented Information clearance since I was 19 years old, held it for 27 more years after that. So I've seen quite a bit of this, and that included my time, by the way, at the White House. And some of the people I've gotten notes from are people who were at the White House Communications Agency or other similar type of locations. And just because this airman got these classified documents somehow, which will be determined, doesn't mean that he's the one who went out and found them. I think there's an aspect of this that had to be a setup, or he was given this information, or somebody was given this information to put him in social media. And the airman was more of a, hey, look how cool I am, look what I got. In the meantime, there's an orchestrator out there somewhere who says, okay, it's out now. Now we've got someone to blame. Now we've got someone to put behind bars. And by the way, while Hillary Clinton and all these other people are still walking free who've committed more egregious violations on the classified handling of information than almost anybody in the history of this country. We are clearly showing our cards again that this classified document dump is a facade as far as who we're blaming. The information is critical, and it tells us a lot about our government's inability or lack of desire to tell us the truth. From Ukraine to Israel to China and many other things. So that part is truly important. But Jack Teixeira in Massachusetts, I guarantee you, if he goes to jail for a very long time due to this, he should be sharing a cell with Hillary and many other the department heads across the current administration's cabinet. And that's I think a fair assessment. But there's another piece to this that I think is critical as well. And Liberty Cowgirl mentioned this already, and that's this Restrict Act. Whether by design or by accident, this exposure of documents and information has led many in the Department of Defense and Department of Justice to say we need to increase our monitoring of social media sites. I'm sorry, the desire to fix this by an increase in monitoring Americans is not the answer. That will never be the answer. We do not need Cyber Patriot Act. We need to repeal the first Patriot Act, first of all. We need to get to the real source of this and hold them accountable. Then we can go from there. Now, those not familiar with the Restrict Act, we'll make it simple. The Cyber Patriot Act is what I would call it. Excessive monitoring of American people across all the cyber community. And if you're using a virtual private network or a VPN on your computer, that becomes illegal and finable under federal law under that act. The Senate is working on that now. It's already in committee. I'd be likely to say that the House would kill it if it came that direction in the first place. But if we know one thing about these communists and socialists, they're not going to give up after a first attempt. And they're going to try to bring something like this back. So I truly believe that there was an aspect of this. They're going to take advantage of this document leak to be able to provide the excuse for voting in something like the Restrict Act. Because guess what we need to do in the government? We need to keep you safe. I'm sorry, no, I think I can handle that myself. Thank you. You need to keep people out of our borders who are not supposed to be here. Those of us inside of our borders in the States can take care of ourselves. Thank you very much. That gets to the question of Iraq and the repeal of the authorization for use of military force. Not only from 2001 or 2002, but 1991. Those are decent starts to Congress reining in the executive's desire to constantly go to war to solve problems. Whether it's a real problem or an invented problem at this point really doesn't matter. Our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, many others, talked about how the decision to go to war must be in the legislature, not in the executive, because the executive is prone to want to be at war. It's easy. It's like their job. But we've been acting like an expeditionary Roman army for a long time, serving at the whim of Caesar and others. That's not how it's supposed to work here. Congress declares war, president executes, and is held accountable for the results. Only after Congress says yes. Which they haven't done, by the way, since 1942. So the Congress pulling back those two authorizations for use of military force are a good start. But the 2001 authorization is still in place, which was for Afghanistan and the global war on terror. It is so broad that everything else that's happening can happen underneath that umbrella. The National Guard that's in Syria, the advisors in Iraq still, any work that we're doing in Afghanistan, and I don't know, all the countries around the world. What is the global war on terror anyways? Well, quite simply, it's global. So that's their excuse to be able to continue the perpetual conflict that lets our country burn within our own borders while we try to fight every other war around the world. Getting our people out of Sudan, that could be a very good mission and necessary to do. Solving Sudan's problems? No, that's not our job. So mission creep has always been an issue. That's how you go from we're going to go after Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan to we're going to try to build that country in 20 years and leave it we're going to leave it worse than we left and then we came into it in the first place. So until All authorizations for use of military force are repealed, every single one of them. And until Congress puts the thumb down and the hammer down on the fact that they are only the ones, or the only ones who can declare war, this perpetual conflict thing will continue. And we can't do that. We must secure ourselves first right now at this point, and then we'll worry about everything else that we need to worry about, which, by the way, I would argue is not anywhere near as much as we should. We have to, if we take care of our homeland, a lot of other things will take care of themselves as a result of that focus.
I want to make a comment real quick on what the colonel said about giving up a little bit of our freedom for security. That's very important to me because I'm not against the government. I want to be clear on that. I know I talk about a lot of stuff, and it probably comes off as, man, LW absolutely hates government. I don't hate the government. I believe the government is founded from we the people. Like, we are the government. People have the power. We select representation to go to DC by demographics of population. I think it's every 400,000 people we send a representative. Those are the people that speak for us, we the people, and they should speak for us. And if they're not speaking for us, kick them to the curb and get somebody else. So I'm not against government, but I am for limited government. There's really only 4 functions that the government should do, and I don't remember all 4 of them. I know one of them is protect our borders. That's like the biggest thing is protect borders, and I think the other one is Congress. So that, I think that's 2 of the 4 things that government should really do. But here's where I want to add to his comment about these leaked documents, and now they're going to use that against us to try to censor us more on social media and other places. And they're going to use exactly what the colonel said. Well, we got to do this to protect you guys. We got to keep you safe. There's so much disinformation and misinformation out there. We got to protect the American people. No, you don't. I don't need to be protected. Like, I can get all that information and discern for myself what's BS and what's not. I don't need you to do that for me. I don't need the government to be my filter. The government is in every aspect of our lives, and it's time to get rid of that and put government where it belongs, around the borders, around Congress with other countries, and the other 2 functions that they need to do. Everything else is hogwash. But Ben Franklin said it the best. When someone is willing to give up a little bit of freedom for a little bit of security, you deserve neither. They used the same thing on us when the sickness hit our shores, February of 2020. They used, we'll keep you safe if you do this, and we'll keep you safe if you do that. Just give up your freedom and get one of these, and give up your freedom and do one of these, and give up your freedom and stay home, and give up your freedom and stay 6 feet away, and give up all this freedom so that the government will save you and keep you safe. And I am 100% against that. I don't need the government to tell me what to do. I don't need the government to keep me safe, except for my borders. And guess what, Colonel? The government is failing. They're not keeping me safe. If you want to keep LW safe, if you want to keep Liberty Cowgirl safe, if you want to keep all these people in chat safe, then protect our southern border and our northern border, because we don't talk about that very much, but there's plenty going on the northern border that's just as bad as the southern border. So if you want to protect the American people, then protect our borders, and I'll yield.
I don't know if I need to add anything to that. That speaks for itself. That's why I would bring an entire division back to the U.S. and put them on the southern border. But I'm going to go over to Liberty Cowgirl right now. I think, Mike, that was phenomenal. Nothing to add.
Well, listen, there's nothing else to be said. It's ridiculous at this point. Action needs to be taken. But here, let me just go one step further. Let's talk about how all these people need to be held accountable. Now, just to quote the general himself was out on, and I applaud you 2 gentlemen out there on the mainstream television going against the grain, probably saying a lot of what people don't want to hear. But what General Holt said yesterday on Newsmax is that Anthony Blinken the story is about this letter and how this disinformation campaign got started with the the son's laptop. I don't want to say his name and ruin the broadcast. But the bottom line is all this information is coming to light now, and he said that this kid is a punk who traffics kids and traffics drugs. And that's on national television.
Don't forget the illegal firearm.
And this is what the people want to hear.
Don't forget about the illegal firearm. Just saying.
Yes. And this is what's actually going on, and it needs to be acknowledged, and these people need to be held accountable. And I applaud you on the mainstream media. You all are not holding back. You're out there. You're putting out the truth. I was so happy to hear him finally come out and say that the other day, because all of America is seeing this, and that's why we've got everybody holding on their seat for an EBS that's probably never going to come, because it's a way to make people complicit and just stretch things down the line. Because I want to get to, again, what people believe and what reality is. We're trying to stay closer to reality is what we're trying to get people back to, closer to home, closer to what matters. Pull people in from all these far-fetched misinformation, disinformation campaign, and all these false facts that are out there. So along those lines, and then we'll get to an update on what's going on in the Ukraine and Russia, and how you see that panning out. But I want to still focus on some of these other things that are happening here domestically. We understand, and there's reports all over this country, that they're planning an invasion, a planned invasion of this country through the northern and southern border, to the tune of like 30 to 50K people coming in from different areas, and they're being mapped on the way here. Colonel, in your experience in the military, is the military watching this? Do you think they're planning to do anything to stop it? Or are we still dealing with the concept of half the military is taking orders from this, and I'm going to call them what they are, these belligerent occupiers, because that's what they are. They're belligerent occupiers that have invaded our country. If you want to go to the Law of War manual, and that's a whole nother show for a whole nother time, but that's what I focus on, is the Law of War manual, and the steps are associated with that, and where we're at in that regard from a legal standpoint. But is this administration going to allow 30 to 50,000 people to suddenly come traipsing across the border and invade our country without doing anything?
They already are. Let's make that very simple. Just because it's not a coordinated army in a uniform does not mean that we're not being invaded. And it's coming across the border. It has been coming across the border like crazy. My deputy director for this organization, Restore Liberty, is a Border Patrol cop. He knows very well that the invasion's already ongoing. They're just wearing civilian clothes. They're changing our culture. Our elections are changing so many things. So if we're asking, will the administration allow this invasion? Ongoing, and 50,000 we're way past that. We're into the millions. So that's the real invasion going on. Will the administration allow a uniformed style, pure competitor type of invasion thing to happen without being observed? I find that unlikely. And I'd find that most of our opposition and enemies would probably not want to do that anyways, because they're going to let us just destroy ourselves if we don't fix ourselves. Why would they do something that would actually galvanize the people of this country against them? Let's think of America post 9/11 and how we came together. If a true foreign adversary in the normal way that we're used to came after America in that fashion, they would unite the American people again the way that we haven't been in quite some time. So what's the better way to do it? Well, let's invade your southern border with a whole bunch of people, 200 Chinese, military-age males at a time, bringing up trucks from the Darin Gap in Panama. I've got people down there sending me pictures of them doing that. Let's bring people across the northern border. Let's, by the way, destroy the petrodollar by forming our own coalitions and trade coalitions, different kinds of trade coalitions, and make the dollar's value become so weak that the nation just collapses underneath of that. This is why you see the BRICS organization expanding into other countries and people like China and Brazil saying we're no longer going to use the dollar standard in our trade anyways. So they don't have to do the invasion of this country in the way that we would normally envision such an invasion. They're doing it already in a number of ways, through our culture, through our currency, through our capitalism, destroying our constitution by ourselves. We're committing assisted national suicide. And the medical professionals are we the people. We have to intervene. There's so many ways to do that, and it's not easy. And don't let the fact that, we're not going to be able to fix DC stop you from moving, because DC's gone. Fix your county, fix your community, fix your state, fix whatever level that God calls you to work at. It doesn't matter that we all come together to try to drain the swamp. That swamp is deep. And what the opposition and the deep state do all the time is they're just going to keep filling it up from the bottom through all the people that the judges and the, from county commissioners who move up through state senates, who move into the federal Senate, who move into cabinet positions. That's what all they do. Everybody who gets fired or cut out of the national DC establishment is a sacrificial lamb to the greater agenda in the first place. They'll just find somebody else who will do the exact same thing as these other folks and keep marching to the beat of their own drum. We can unwind that, and it will take time and a lot of effort. But we've got to start at a local level, which is what Restore Liberty focuses on, is local level work. We'll engage in we're going to paint this big picture for folks globally, nationally, whatever it may take, so they understand it. But we're going to bring it down to the fact that the action people have to take and the decision they have to take to take action is at their local level, unless God calls you to do something else. And there's so much there, but I just constantly remind myself that in America, we the people are Caesar. So if you're going to use the biblical example of giving unto Caesar, just remember that's you. And start moving.
Amen on that one, Colonel.
Hey, Cowgirl.
I'm going to ask you one more question.
Cowgirl, can I say something real quick? I want to add to the Colonel's to his comment there. I want to give some people some numbers really quick because the Colonel is telling you guys the absolute truth. Okay, so the end of 2020, there was 1.2 million illegal aliens that crossed our southern border. There's somewhere between 3,000 and 8,000 illegal aliens crossing every day. So when Liberty Cowgirl makes a comment, what do you think about 30,000? Heck, 30,000 ain't nothing. Because there was also another report that within every 28 to 30 days, there could be a possible of 500,000 illegals crossing our border, meaning the population of Atlanta, Georgia. Now, that is north and south. It's a very concerning thing for me personally. As a sovereign nation, how can you be a sovereign nation if you don't protect your own borders and you're allowing illegal people coming across our border? Not in the thousands. This is the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands of people coming across the border. Here's another number for you. I like numbers, and I did a lot of deep diving in this. There are 2 million illegal aliens in the state of New York. I believe it might even be in the city of New York City, that they're trying to allow them to vote on city issues. They are illegal. They're not citizens of the United States. And when the Colonel says they're changing the face of America, they're changing our culture. They're doing these things. Well, the saying is they'll take America down without ever firing a shot. That's what he's talking about. And then back to the petrodollar really quick and BRICS nations. Some of our biggest allies are starting to entertain the thought of joining BRICS nations. Those are red flags to me. Those are concerning things that we really need to be paying attention to, because when BRICS finally gets everything that they're wanting, and believe me, China and Russia wants everybody signed up for BRICS except for us and the UK, maybe even Australia. There might be 3 of us in Canada. So maybe there's 4 pillars that aren't invited to BRICS nations. Mexico is looking at BRICS nations. They are on our southern border. Just some very concerning things that I think that the colonel was hitting there, and I like the numbers because it really opens people's eyes to how serious some of this stuff is. So when he says we can't attack DC and wipe out DC, it's already gone, to get involved at your local level, I support that 100%.
Right. And there is so much going on now. It's even hard to, zoom in on what's more important than the other. But, what I want to clear up is some of these broader questions before we get to some of the simpler one. But, Colonel, I would really love to get your thoughts. And I know you're retired, but, I can't think of anyone more experienced that could give us some analysis on the Space Force. I want to talk about the Space Force uh, for just a minute, because we have a lot of people across this country. We know that the Space Force was created by 45 uh, as in my opinion, a safety mechanism to all this. But we also know that, when he launched the Space Force in December of 2019, he chose General John Raymond to head up the Space Force at that time. And then when the Obama administration came in, the head of Space Force was changed out. Okay, that was key. And I follow these, of course, because Space Force is in my backyard, so I'm interested. We all know that there, especially here locally, the battle that's been going on to move Space Force from our hometown here in Colorado, where you retired, Colonel, and to move it to, I think it's the Redstone Arsenal, or that facility. You'll have to excuse me, I don't know the exact name, but this has been an ongoing battle here in our hometown, and this is huge. But back to the appointments of who's running Space Force, because we know that that's a very elite branch of the military, and so we keep asking ourselves, okay, who's really in charge of this military right now? Is it Space Force, or in fact, are there other admirals and generals, which we're all hearing about, such as Admiral Crandall? I think people are very familiar with his name, who's down, I'll say, at the spa right now, overseeing some things. And then, of course, General Berger is gone now. He has stepped away and is back home, but uh, we now have General Saltzman up there. And of course, when backstories were breaking about, again, and it's alleged and to be reported, but I want to talk about it here first tonight. We have reports of financial auditing being done within the Space Force, the fact that their budget might be in trouble, the fact that people are looking at that budget and saying, where did all the money that was allocated to Space Force go? And, allegedly, there were loans given to the Ukraine by the Space Force through government contractors. And the beneficiary and the people who are doing this are government contractors, third party people like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and then they deal with the Ukrainian uh, defense people, and that's how the money is getting filtered. But we're hearing backstories that the Space Force budget is in peril right now. Have you, as a military man, heard of any of this stuff in the background going on? Of course, when this information was breaking about Saltzman and the fact that he might have been detained, they were showing him out in the general public at the Space Symposium here. But that's no surprise to me, because when that happened with General Milley, they had him handing out diplomas at the Air Force Academy. So, optics are one thing and reality is another. But these are all stories that are out there in the open source that people are starting to grasp onto, particularly when it comes to these military agencies that are supposedly in charge. From a military standpoint, who's in charge of this country? From a military standpoint, in your opinion, right now, sir?
Well, yeah, half an hour left. That'll take it all. uh, all right. So the way it's supposed to work, of course, is that the commander in chief is in charge of the military. He uses his chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to oversee the other service chiefs of staff as the primary advisors to the White House to make sure they make smart decisions. I give you Afghanistan. So we know that didn't work. So they also, the way the military also works is there's combatant commanders, 4-star commanders across the well, there's Northcom, of course, that you're familiar with, and the Spacecom, as you mentioned, but there's Europe, there's Africa, there's and there's the Middle East and everything, Central Command and everything else. So those are your commanders and all these different things. So I guess who's really in charge? Well, I can promise you one thing, that it's not Joe Biden. And Mark Milley is a deep state tool. And I use that like a literal sense, meaning that he's getting used and allowing himself to be used in a lot of different ways. And anything that is put in front of the American people is a facade, and the reality is going to be somewhere behind that curtain of what is going on. So the Space Force, all forces, the entire Department of Defense budget, I can tell you from the rooms and the places that I've had access to and been in, without killing off this broadcast for other reasons, that the military budget is used to cover a lot of things. And the problem is that if you go in and cut the budget, you're harming our national security and you're going against the veterans and the troops and all this kind of stuff. That's the greatest facade, because most of that money, if it was actually spent on things that were soldier oriented and equipment for the soldiers to fight and win wars, well, this would be a different equation and an entirely different discussion, and that those problems likely wouldn't exist the way they do now. But they're using that funding to do a lot of different things that they shouldn't need to be doing, or doing at all. And I can almost guarantee you that I could cut the Department of Defense's budget in half and say that the whole point is that we're going to defend this nation. All the rest of that garbage is going to go away. Contractors in Ukraine, these different combatant commands around the world, where we need to divvy up the world into sections and pieces and say, yeah, we're going to be there, we're going to fix it. No, again, coming back to something very simple that I used when I was a commander at Fort Carson there in Colorado, was I have no right to look at my neighbor's yard and complain about the mess when my house and my yard has been trashed. Let me take a look at my house first. Then we'll move from there. The specifics of your claim as far as the Space Force budget, I would argue that anywhere you look in the Department of Defense, you will find money moving to places that it shouldn't be.
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Colonel, and giving us this military perspective, because it's confusing at times. There's so much information going on out there. People just don't, they don't know how to disseminate it, and of course they'll jump on board with certain things. I'm gonna straight blank ask you a question. Who do you think's commander in chief? Obviously, it's not Joe Biden. There's no way that guy is cognitively available to be commander in chief. Best case scenario, he's the front man for whoever's pulling the strings behind that big curtain. I don't know. Obama, Big Mike, who knows? I mean, it could be anybody, in my opinion. It could be a group of people doing it. Milley is a sellout. He even said on C-SPAN, I have committed treason by selling information or giving information to China. So to me, he's out too. So a military educated guess, who would you think commander-in-chief is at this point?
I'm going to give you a partial lawyer answer, and that it depends. But because there's two pieces to this that I would answer that. Who's pulling the strings? I will give you the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and the Council on Foreign Relations. That's who's pulling the strings. Who is the one in the White House that has all those strings attached to them primarily and is working those efforts Her name is Susan Rice. If you really want to know who's there. Joe Biden's a pen and a phone. That's all they need him to do. Did you know that earlier in the week he signed 50 executive orders in one day? You know, these are the kinds of things that shouldn't be happening under any president. I don't care who it is. I mean, if I was president tomorrow, my first statement would be that every single executive order that exists in all of history is rescinded. And then we would go from there. So that's who's pulling the string. Now, to make that even a little bit more open, I guess you could say, is the deep state agency heads and the administrative state behind them are the ones that are operationalizing those strings. But Susan Rice is there because Joe Biden is rarely ever in the White House anyways. I hope that helps.
I think that was a great answer. I think that was a reality answer, in my opinion. There it is. I mean, telling the truth.
Well, and some would say it's a mystery.
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility. And I think we'll see who 47 is. But on paper, the commander-in-chief is still Joe Biden. That's just a fact of life. But in function, it is not. But again, we got to get away from this idea that Trump's in the Southern White House and still in charge. No, he's not. That has not been the truth since he left the White House. And so we've got to recage our thinking and get back to grasping reality and what we can do to make a difference.
Right. Okay, now let's get to what everybody's waiting for, and then we'll get into a couple of questions from the audience. We have been pulling some questions, by the way, from the chat during this. But why don't you take us around the world, to the world stage real quick. I know you gentlemen were on Newsmax this morning, you and General Blaine, and give us a readout of what's going on in Ukraine, this offensive that they intend to launch against Russia, how this relates with what's going on in Taiwan, the military positioning that's taking place in the skies with the training and all that's going on there, along with the ships, and how does all of this suddenly relate to what's going on in Sudan? I'll pass it over to you, Colonel, to unpack it all.
Boy, you guys are full of easy questions tonight. Well, first of all, I will just constantly remind people that it's our job to be joyful warriors regardless of what's going on around us, but not to be naive. So I will take it back before Ukraine, and I will take it back to the specific moment in time when we abdicated and surrendered in Afghanistan and the message that passed to the world. I developed the plan for how to evacuate Afghanistan successfully, and I can promise you that every single thing that was supposed to happen that would have made that mission go right, they decided to go the opposite direction. So that's why that failed. I believe in many ways it was an intentional failure. Even if it wasn't intentional, the consequences are the same. Blaine Holt and I both said as soon as that happened that Taiwan was going to be the next major thing that we should be, that Ukraine was the next major thing that we should be looking at. Because we know through history and what had been going on through our work in Europe and various things that Ukraine was always on the top of Russia's list because of so many things that Ukraine brings. So America is weak. We got a president who's weak, who will not respond and do the right things in the face of adversaries. What is he doing? Well, for years, even as VP and other administrations has been saying, okay, we need to push for Ukraine to be part of NATO. That's like having an adversary organization country in Canada, by equivalent. Russia never wanted that. What they wanted from us was security assurances that Ukraine wouldn't be in NATO. So that as soon as we said, no, we're not going to do that, they said, okay, then we're going to take care of it. Because, by the way, in order to be in NATO, you cannot have borders that are in dispute. And that has been part of Russia's tactics for a long time, is to make sure those borders are in dispute so Ukraine cannot be part of NATO, which is why it's really bad right now that they're talking to Stoltenberg and in NATO, and he's saying that we're going to bring Ukraine into the NATO fold. What does that do? It emboldens Russia. It says, you know what, Putin, We're just going to go ahead and tell you that the same thing that started this war, we're going to continue it. So Putin will take this however far he takes this. That's clearly up to his choice. What is the result of that, though, is that they're draining the West of military readiness, materially primarily, while we are also draining ourselves personally through our personnel actions, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the thing in the shoulder, and all those things that I think we're all aware of. So if you weaken the military internally by people, you weaken our military materially by sending it all overseas, you weaken our country by removing the power of our currency and the standards by which the world measures against the dollar, and take that away, you're building this recipe to take down not only the U.S., because if you take down the U.S., you take down the West. One of the things that I work with is called the Global Veterans Coalition, and I founded that, and we work with, and we build a newsletter monthly that paints that story across multiple democratic nations: Australia, New Zealand, the Dutch, Germany, Denmark, US, Canada, and others. That theme is true in every single free nation that you're seeing happen here. Food security, energy security, the security of our currencies, and the value of our currencies. All of that is happening. Why? Largely because China wants to be the dominant force on this planet. And they've always wanted to be. And they have a mindset of full spectrum warfare, working every single possible thing that they can. And we're seeing it happening real world. And they want to capture Taiwan. The best way to capture Taiwan is to make sure that the U.S. can't interfere. Now, the question should be for the U.S., is that worth us getting involved in China's dispute with Taiwan? That's a dispute and a debate for another day. It could take a long time. But ultimately, a lot of this comes and rests in the Chinese Communist Party, so they can reduce the West to increase the East. And everything else going on around, from how Russia and China are both working into Africa and into Central Asia, taking over these the metal mines and lithium and various things like that. Everything they're doing, Belt and Road Initiative, the BRICS, as we've already mentioned. If you want to paint that entire picture very simply, destroy the West, increase the East, and there you go. These are the ways that they're trying to do that. And you mix in there this constant stepchild, I guess you could say, of terrorism throughout the Middle East, specifically in other locations, keep us looking at the wrong thing, while the thing that we should be looking at continues largely unabated. That is changing some. China's purchases of land in the U.S., people becoming aware of what's going on with the currency, exposing the Chinese spies, the Congress right now doing its job and hammering these department heads and various people to expose the truth. That is going on, for sure. Will it solve things? It remains to be seen. But the goal does not change ultimately. And and as far as restore liberty is, I'll go back to the same thing we always say when it comes to that conflict, and bring it back to Ukraine. We stand on the side of the people who suffer in the results of these kind of conflicts, whether they be Russian, Ukrainian, or others, because we know that the governments that are corrupt are the U.S., the Ukraine, and Russia. And so really all they are is a playing board for the global Game of Thrones. And the kings and queens are circling the throne to see who lands. That's what disgusts people that are a part of Restore Liberty, is that people are being used as pawns in all of these cases, so that other people can put themselves and maintain themselves in positions of power. I hope that helps.
Well, no, it's wonderful, and I think it's important that the viewing audience gets this type of analysis in order to clear up. Again, we're in information warfare out here in the general public, and what we're trying to do is decipher and get people back on the right track and closer into reality and what's going on. Nonetheless, people are engaged on a level that they haven't been in, I would say, in the history that I've been alive, and they're in the know. They're very intelligent, and people can see it all coming to light now. It's out there in the open, and we're watching this go on. And people are wondering, how long is this going to be allowed to continue? And I know there's another broadcast will get into all the comms and what they mean, and timelines and so forth. But I want to keep it to the basics tonight, because these things are so important. Well, all of these things are happening, like you said. We've got major things going on here, like the Restrict Act and liberties that they're about to strip from us right now, while everybody's off following all these other trails of what's going on out there. But LW, I don't know if you can see, if people want to drop a few questions in the chat that haven't been answered here. We try to cover a lot of ground to get most of the information out there. Can you see any questions from your side, LW? I got limited view of chat over here.
Yeah, I'll check chat out. I can see all of chat. For those of you who are over there following us on Rumble tonight on Liberty Warrior 86, if you want to drop a question in the chat over there on Rumble, I'll be bouncing back and forth. It only takes me a click. If you guys have any questions for the Colonel tonight, I know I asked a couple of them, but now's the Q&A. Go ahead and start dropping them. I'll pay attention. I'll hold my hand up when I've got a question. So I'll turn it back over to you, Liberty Cowgirl. But as soon as a question comes in, I'll raise my hand and I'll ask the question for you guys.
Well, I'll ask the next obvious question of the Colonel, because God forbid he should have a moment to rest here on this panel. But where do we see this all going? How is this all going to end up? Are we headed towards these military tribunals that everybody are talking about this summer, I guess, is a more pointed question?
Well, those military tribunals are part of the so-called plan, so I wouldn't count on those. I wouldn't even worry about those. If you're putting your effort into eagerly waiting that kind of stuff, then what will be accomplished is going to be more sitting back and waiting for others to solve your own problems. We can't afford to do that. Nobody can afford to do that. And even if that was going to happen out of some miracle out of the sky that was going to happen, so does that mean that we should just sit back and watch? That's the opposite response of what we should be doing. I don't care about any of these, theories about who's in the White House, who's not in the White House, who's in what's going on in Florida, what's not going on in Florida. These are moderately interesting things to debate, but the reality of the fact is, if you're not doing anything as a result of that, then you're doing exactly what the deep state and the opposition wants you to do, which is nothing. And that's how we will lose. So I truly wish I knew where all this was going, but I told you that the joyful warrior part of this has to be something that we have to keep at the forefront. And I mean, I'm thrilled to death in many ways to be living at a time such as this, because all this stuff was happening all the time. Now it's exposed, and it gives us something to fight even more. We know who they are. We know what they're doing. We know why they're doing it. And if we know those things, now we can make a distinct decision on what to do, how to take action, and where to take action. And if that is why, we're living through a time such as this, in order to do that, then I say amen. I'm there for it. Why? Not because I'm worried about the life I've led and what I have left. I'm happy. I could die tomorrow, be a happy man with everything that's happened, and my kids are awesome. Fine. What I can't do is fail to engage in the fight that secures a liberty for my children and grandchildren's future. If I do that, shame on me. And we should be first in line. Mike, go ahead. I see you trying to jump in.
I keep pushing it on accident, but I do have a comment, and then there is a question in chat that I wanted to hit you with. I got the nickname Captain Skeptical because of all of this, what I call distractions, and I've been trying to preach it for a long time now. Yeah, some of it I did see a path. Now I don't see paths. So I try to focus on, and I ask this question: how does what is going on, whether it be Trump get arrested or any of this other stuff, how does it impact my immediate life today? If it doesn't have any impact on my life, I don't even pay it no attention. Like, I need to focus on the things like what's going on in my kids' school, what's going on in my neighborhood here. Those are the things that impact my life immediately today. If what you see in the White House you believe is a clone or an actor, how does that affect my life today immediately? It doesn't. I don't care. I don't care if that's the real Joe Biden or the not the real Joe Biden. It doesn't affect my life. And that's where I put my focus. So the first question is this. Are we at a point of no return? And this is from BCATS. Now, what she means by that is it too late? Is the country already too far gone? Are we at a point of no return where it just doesn't matter anymore, I guess, would be the question.
Well, that's always a possibility. And then I would say, so be it. I'm still going to engage in this fight with every ounce of my being and every hour of my day that I can, even if we are at a point of no return. Now, I will caveat that with a statement from, a historian's perspective. I've studied the history of countries like China and many of the countries in Europe and other places around the world. And a constant theme in every single one of these nations' history is that they reach a point where they're so bureaucratically top heavy and in debt and various other things that the self-correction cannot come by normal means. And it comes by way of the rebuild after a collapse. I don't want that. Nobody here does. And America is uniquely suited by design, both in our governmental structure and the people that we have here, to be able to overcome that with enough concerted effort, working together. That doesn't mean that we should be naive to think that it can't happen, which is why I have a whole other aspect of what we're doing when it comes to things like providing your own food, your own water, your own shelter for that capacity and capability in case things do go horribly wrong. That way you can come back and take care of yourself, your family, your immediate community, and rebuild from there. But history teaches us, it happened in China, it's happened in countries throughout the world, is that sometimes in order for there to be a big fix to a big problem, you've got to get back to the bottom the hard way. And I hate to see that. I would terribly hate to see that for all of us. But that could be a reality. And the last part of that is people always ask, are we seeing the events of the book of Revelation play out in front of our eyes? Maybe. Again, we're not in charge of that. We can't control it. If it does happen, okay, so be it. But I like to point people to the second book of Opinions, chapter 4, where it says that we can stop fighting when we think the end is near. And put on our boots and get to fighting with everything we've got until that time happens, or it doesn't. Hope that helps a little bit. Who knows? But I'm going to go forward with a smile on my face, regardless of wherever the end is.
Thank you for that, Colonel. Let me ask you a question out of left field, if you want to, chime in on this, because I know it's of a lot of interest to a lot of people. I'm certain it's outside your wheelhouse, but I'd be interested in your thoughts. What do you think about this whole Nasara Jasara psyop that's out there?
I think I'll go back to Mike's comments and say that it doesn't affect me. I refuse to let it affect me. And frankly, it's one of those cases of, God has given me the discernment to see through the things he needs me to see through and to do the things I need to do. And as long as I know that I'm in his will and doing those things, no psyop can affect you when you got the God of the universe telling you what the truth is. So stick to that. All that other stuff, I honestly give it zero thought on any single day, because there's way more to do than that.
I think that's a great answer, and I know that there are people that want to still follow that, and that, if that's your choice, that's great. It doesn't affect me because I don't allow it to affect me anymore, and I think that's a great comment that the Colonel made. It just doesn't affect me, and I don't give it any time to affect me. Here's another question from BCats. Looks like she's the one really asking questions tonight. I drop them in the private chat so you can kind of see them and read along too, just so the two of you know. I'm copying and pasting them in private chat so you guys can see them. But BCats asked this question. She said, question, President Trump said we have to legally take back the White House. We didn't lose the White House legally. Do you want to make any comment on that?
Well, I think they're both parts of that statement are correct. What we need to do as constitutional abiding citizens is do things in accordance with the Constitution. That's where we need to land no matter what. That's kind of like landing on your feet when you're a cat, right? You always need to land on that. Did we lose the White House illegally? Most certainly. And I could go into that for a very long period of time. I've been part of that whole process from the beginning. I'm well versed in everything that had to do with the American election of 2020. And we know he's not legitimate. There's no question about that. The best way to win, though, is to win using the Constitution. Not naive to the fact that our elections are under duress. Not naive to the fact of all of these different things that people could bring up as arguments about how we may not have an illegal election or a legitimate election in this country ever again. Yes, that's a possibility. I would rather lose righteously than win illegally.
Great comment there. You guys, you can keep dropping questions there in the chat. I'll grab them and ask the Colonel. I like how he answered that, because that's kind of how I want to answer things from this point forward. I think he hit it spot on. When we're talking about the big E, and I don't want to say that word too many times because it'll attract the wrong attention. But even though I said whether it's the real Joe Biden, fake vote, whatever you guys want to believe, that does not mean that I personally do not think that the things that happened November 2020 was okay. I want to be clear on that, guys. I still am in the same camp with you guys. I have formed a different opinion about certain things, but I still agree that it wasn't right. And like the Colonel said, I would rather be righteous and lose righteously than to do anything to cheat to try to win. And I totally agree with that statement too. Like, I'm not into trying to go out there and do anything nefarious to change any decision or make any change like that. I want to do it the right way. I believe that God will bless us when we walk that righteous path. It's when we get off of that path that we start all getting in trouble. So any other questions that you guys have for the Colonel tonight, go ahead. And I'm going to hop over to Rumble right now. Just check Rumble. There's nothing on Rumble that I see.
I'm gonna chime in.
Go ahead.
One last question that's the utmost importance to people out there right now, because there's a lot of talk about this. I myself have heard a lot of military people weigh in on this topic in the past, and I think we're there to open up these conversations, because a lot is being said about the mapping out of what's happening right now is being done by AI. Colonel, where does AI, in your opinion, come into all of this, whether it's with the military planning or with our financial systems or in just our life in general? We all see that AI has arrived. Do you agree with that concept?
Well, I think it would be difficult to disagree with the fact that AI has arrived. That's clearly here. And I see AI, and I'm not a technology expert, believe me. I'm perfectly happy to light a fire in the woods or do something simple like that. But when it comes to technology, I kind of see how it gets used. But that's about where I'm going to limit myself. But I see AI in a couple ways. Three ways. First of all is the human component. What can they do to the human genome through the use of artificial intelligence and the science that it can create? I think we've seen a brief experiment in that already, what it can do to people. So I think that's going to be part of it. everything down to actual modifications of the human body that are visible to others, and other things that may not be visible, and that gets into other arenas. The second piece is the manipulation of currency as we get towards environmental social governance and central bank digital currencies and social credit scores. How you make that possible and how you operationalize that, to use a military term, is through speed and databases. So you stick your debit card into a gas tank, into a gas machine. Let's just say a gas pump still exists in 20 years, and you stick that card in there, and it's got a microchip on it, and that codes what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, based on the things that you do in your house, how many miles you drive, because it's slave to your car. I think that's one of the ways that AI will get abused. I mean, it's has the potential of doing some very wonderful things, but there aren't the right kind of wonderful people often in government who will use these things against us in the first place. So the currency side of that's where that kind of goes. The ability to engage in commerce and things, anything that basically sustains, magnifies, protects life will be used against you at some point. So the human body, the currency, free speech. Okay. Your ability to take part in the dissemination of information. I mean, if this podcast were attempted in a world where artificial intelligence had been completely weaponized totally against the patriot type movement, to simplify it, then you would never even be able to get started, because AI is going to identify so many different traits of you as a person, the IP address of your house, all these kinds of things, and crush your free speech even more. That's where I see AI being used in a negative way. The beautiful thing about technology and things like physics and other pieces of science is that people like us can also use it. And this is how resistances and undergrounds and various other things form. There's a lot of stuff going on out there in the world right now that has to do with keeping AI and other security and monitoring agencies and technologies out of your life without like taking your phone and throwing it in the pond. So I know we've only got 1 minute left, but I think that gets to your question. AI can be great. In the wrong hands, could be horrible.
I want to ask the Colonel one last question that came in from Rumble, and I think it's a great way to end the show tonight, because there's so many people asking this question. This comes from Lambaster over on my Rumble channel. What should be the first thing I bring up to friends and family who don't believe any of this? I think that's a great question to ask. That's the last one I'm going to ask for tonight from the crowd. So I'm going to go ahead and yield.
Well, all right. I think it would be important to ask them what they do believe first. Have them come towards you and explain what they believe, why they believe it. Then you know exactly what you're dealing with in the first place. I'll take this to my biblical apologetics teaching. And there's a simple lesson that talks about the ability to identify fraudulent currency, counterfeit currency, and real currency. You don't study the counterfeit currency, you study the real. Because there's only one real currency. That's what they teach them. And so if you lay out 10 different versions of counterfeits, every single one of them will stick out as counterfeit, because you know what the real looks like. So find out what kind of counterfeit you're working with first. And then once you know that, then you can go into their specific arguments and say, okay, if it's dealing with the thing that shall not be mentioned in your shoulder, let's go through some statistics. I personally know people who've died immediately upon taking it, that kind of thing. But if you don't know where they're coming from and why they believe what they believe, you're never going to get past that in the first place. Then ask them, number two, what would it take to change your mind? Because you're putting the onus of proof, you're putting the weight of all of this back on them to explain why they are where they are what it would take to move them, and then you know specifically what it would take to get them to your side. Sometimes it takes time, and it's frustrating. We all have family that we can't get these kinds of things across to. Number three is if, despite all of your best efforts, but the science, the facts, the evidence, the logic, and everything that you can possibly bring to bear, that they're just not going to ever believe it, then you're just going to have to kick the dust off your feet and move on. It's hard. I know that. It is extremely hard because these are friends and these are family. But we've got to make a conscious decision about where we invest our time and our effort. So to recap that real quick, ask them what they believe, ask them why they believe it, ask them what it would take to move their position, and make a conscious decision if they're never going to move on yourself. It ain't easy, but that's the best we've got.
Well, I think those are great words of wisdom, Colonel, and I want to thank you for that. LW, I want to give you a chance to make your closing comments, and then I'll make mine, and we'll end this very long broadcast. We've gotten a lot of information out here tonight, and I'll save it for my closing remark. LW, what would you like to end with tonight?
Well, I'll make it very short and sweet. I know that the Colonel has to get going here. I just want to thank Liberty Cowgirl Network for inviting me here to be a co-host and being part with the Colonel here. And I just want to say thank you to the Colonel for joining us tonight. And thank you for everybody who showed up in chat, the great questions, the great comments. We're streaming on multiple platforms tonight. And so I'm just grateful to be alive. I'm grateful to share the screen, the camera, the mic with two wonderful patriots. I'm grateful to share this live tonight with all the beautiful patriots in chat, everybody who's watching. So I'm just a grateful guy tonight. It's Saturday night. It's a great way to spend a Saturday and to really just put out, in my opinion, some of the best information you're going to get. Good night, guys.
Well, I want to thank you for that, LW. I want to thank you for being my special co-host tonight. We had a lot of very important matters to dig into, and we know we're dealing with a lot of technical difficulties, and you made that seamless for me tonight. And I just owe you a sincere thanks for that. I want to thank everybody that showed up that's in the viewing audience tonight. We made history tonight on the Liberty Cowgirl Network by broadcasting to 4 different platforms simultaneously at the same time. We wanted to do that, Colonel, because we know we put you through the ringer with all these questions. And I just want as many people to hear as possible your voice getting out there. I want to thank you and General Holt for bringing the Restored Liberty organization to the American people and to this country, because you guys bring answers and solutions. We're going to keep shouting out to where people can go to get involved in their local area. And again, we're just so grateful to you. We're going to continue to follow the stories of all of your state directors. I look forward to having Cynthia back so we can continue to get the word out about Colorado and highlight some of these state representatives. And I challenge everybody to do that in their area too. And we look forward to having some more of your state directors on both of our channels, as well as other some of our broadcasting affiliates. So again, thank you very much, Colonel, for being with us here tonight. I think we've been able to offer the public a lot of what's going on. And listen, we're going to keep bringing real people, real information, and real emotion to the airways. And we're going to continue to have back important people that are actually going to assist the American people in helping to restore this country. So, as Power Girl will say, when you sit down with warriors, it's a different conversation. Good night, everybody.
Well,